Have you ever stood in front of a painting, perhaps a chaotic splash of color by Jackson Pollock, or a bewildering dreamlike landscape by Salvador Dali, and felt a sense of both confusion and profound excitement? A feeling that the rules you thought you knew had been joyfully, audaciously broken. What if I told you that this exact same revolutionary spirit, this desire to shatter the canvas and rebuild it into something new, was the secret fuel that powered one of rock music's most ambitious and misunderstood chapters? We often think of progressive rock as a world of wizards, epic battles, and 20-minute songs. But the truth is far more radical. The story of prog rock is not just a story of musical virtuosity. It is the story of rock and roll going to art school, getting a degree in the avant-garde, and returning to the stage not just to entertain, but to challenge, to provoke, and to expand the very definition of what a song could be. This is the hidden history of how the paint splatters, melted clocks, and jarring collages of 20th century modern art taught rock music how to dream in widescreen technicolor. Before we embark on this journey into the sonic galleries of the mind, I have a small but vital request. This channel, Psych Prog, is a labor of love, dedicated to exploring these very connections. If you believe that music is more than just background noise, if you crave a deeper understanding of the art you love, please take a moment right now to subscribe. Hit that like button to let the digital gatekeepers know we're onto something special here. And most importantly, share this exploration with anyone and everyone you know who has ever felt that a 3-minute pop song simply isn't enough. Your support is the lifeblood that allows us to keep digging. Thank you. To truly grasp the seismic shift that progressive rock represented, we must first cast our minds back, not to the smoky clubs of London in 1968, but to the fractured, shell-shocked cultural landscape of Europe in the decades prior. The two world wars had not only redrawn the maps of nations, they had shattered the West's confidence in its own traditions. The old certainties, in religion, in politics, in morality, and crucially, in art, seemed like hollow relics from a more naive age. How could a traditional, representational painting of a beautiful landscape adequately express the horror of the trenches or the existential dread of the atomic age? It couldn't. And so, art had to be broken. It had to be reinvented from the ground up. This wasn't mere rebellion for rebellion's sake, it was a necessary evolution. Movements like Cubism, led by Picasso and Braque, began dismantling reality, showing us a single object from multiple viewpoints simultaneously, shattering the illusion of a single, stable perspective. Think of their fragmented portraits. They weren't trying to paint what a person looked like, but what it felt like to perceive them in time and space. Then came the Surrealists, guided by the psychoanalytic theories of Freud. Artists like Dali and Max Ernst turned their gaze inward, mining the illogical, often disturbing landscapes of the subconscious. Their work was a direct transcription of dreams and nightmares, where familiar objects were juxtaposed in bizarre and unsettling ways to unlock a deeper, more primal truth. Simultaneously, the world of so-called serious music was undergoing its own violent transformation. Composers like Arnold Schoenberg threw out the rulebook of tonality that had governed Western music for centuries, creating a tonal music that was deliberately unsettling, reflecting a world that no longer felt harmonious. Later, iconoclasts like John Cage would question the very definition of music itself, famously composing a piece of complete silence, 4/3 to force the audience to consider the ambient sounds of the environment as part of the composition. In France, pioneers of musique concrète, like Pierre Schaeffer, began crafting entire soundscapes, not with instruments, but with tape loops of everyday sounds, a train whistle, a closing door, a human sigh, splicing them together into a sonic collage. The message from all corners of the art world was clear. The old forms were dead. The raw materials of art, be it paint, sound, or language, were now a playground for radical experimentation. The subject of art was no longer necessarily a beautiful sunset or a noble king. It was often the very process of creation itself. For decades, this artistic vanguard existed in a rarefied world of galleries, concert halls, and academic institutions, seemingly a universe away from the raw, three-chord energy of rock and roll. But in post-war Britain, A unique and crucial bridge was built between these two worlds, the art school. In the 1960s, a government grant system made it possible for a generation of bright, restless working and middle-class teenagers to pursue higher education. For many creatively inclined youths who lacked the formal training for a traditional music conservatory or university, art school was the perfect haven. And these were not your typical stuffy academies focused on life drawing and pottery. British art schools of the era, particularly in London, were hotbeds of avant-garde theory. They were places where a painting student, a sculpture student, and a graphic design student would all be in the same room, arguing about the Dadaists, watching foreign films by Buñuel, and listening to the electronic experiments of Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. The emphasis was less on technical craft and more on the concept. The why was more important than the how, and into this environment walked the future architects of progressive rock. Pete Townshend of The Who, a student at Ealing Art College, fell under the spell of his professor Gustav Metzger, the founder of Autodestructive Art, a performance art form where artworks were designed to destroy themselves. Is it any wonder, then, that Townshend's on-stage guitar smashing was not mere rock star petulance, but a conscious theatrical act of artistic violence, a musical happening? Syd Barrett, the brilliant tragic founder of Pink Floyd, was a painting student at Camberwell, and the band's early incarnation was essentially the house band for the London underground art scene. Their legendary light shows at the UFO Club were not just pretty colors. They were an attempt to create a total sensory environment, a happening that blurred the lines between band and audience, sound and vision, directly inspired by the performance art they were surrounded by. Brian Ferry of Roxy Music, Richard Z. Wright of Pink Floyd, Ray Davies of the Kinks, Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton. The list of rock royalty who passed through the doors of these conceptual laboratories is staggering. They entered as aspiring painters and designers and emerged as musicians who thought like visual artists. They didn't just want to write songs, they wanted to create sonic sculptures, paint oral canvases, and build architectural soundscapes. This art school DNA is the master key to unlocking the perceived complexities of progressive rock. Let's start with Surrealism. Listen to the lyrics of early Genesis during the Peter Gabriel era. On the surface, songs like The Musical Box or the gargantuan 23-minute suite Supper's Ready are a baffling collection of bizarre images. Old, men regressing to infancy, narcissists turning into flowers, figures with six-fingered hands, and all of humanity morphing into the New Jerusalem. A linear narrative is almost impossible to find, but that's the point. Like a Dalí painting, it's not meant to be read like a novel. It's meant to be experienced as a dream. The logic is emotional and associative, not literal. The juxtapositions of the sacred and the profane, the beautiful and the grotesque, the mythic and the mundane. This is pure surrealism translated into sound and word. Gabriel's infamous stage costumes, a flower, a sinister slipper man, a Britannia figure, were not just goofy theatrics. They were the living embodiment of these surrealist characters, turning the concert stage into a moving, breathing art installation. Van der Graaf Generator, led by the fiercely intelligent Peter Hamill, took this even further into the realm of psychological horror, crafting claustrophobic psychodramas that explored alienation and existential dread with a poetic intensity that owed more to German expressionist cinema and surrealist literature than to Chuck Berry. Now, let's consider Cubism and its musical cousin, Collage. How does a band like Yes manage to justify a song like Close to the Edge? Why does it veer from a frantic, almost chaotic opening of swirling keyboards and bass to a serene, pastoral middle section and then culminate in a majestic, cathedral-like organ theme? It's because they are approaching their musical theme, in this case, a vague but powerful concept of spiritual awakening, from multiple perspectives at once, just as Picasso would paint a face from the front and the side in the same image. Each section of the song is not a new song, but a different facet of the same central idea, a different angle on the emotional core. This is musical cubism. The very structure of the song is the message. The same principle applies to the technique of collage. borrowed directly from the visual arts and the musique concrète composers. Pink Floyd's use of the cash register loop in Money is the most famous example. But the practice was everywhere. The snippets of radio broadcasts, the found sounds, the abrupt cuts between wildly different musical styles within a single piece. This was all part of an effort to break down the smooth, polished surface of the pop song and show the seams, to assemble music from disparate, scavenged parts, creating something new and startling from the wreckage of the old. However, this explosive fusion of high art ambition and popular music created a profound and dangerous tension, a challenge that would come to define and nearly destroy the genre. As the songs grew longer, the concepts more esoteric, and the stage shows more elaborate, a chasm began to open between the bands and a significant portion of their audience. The visceral, hip-shaking, rebellious energy of rock and roll seemed to be getting lost under the weight of classical illusions and complex time signatures. The question began to loom, whispered at first, then shouted, "Is this brilliant, or is it just pretentious? Are these artists pushing boundaries, or are they just self-indulgent musicians showing off their expensive equipment and art school educations?" ELP's stage show, featuring Keith Emerson wrestling with a gargantuan Moog synthesizer that flew over the stage, or Rick Wakeman of Yes performing a concept album about the wives of Henry VIII on ice, became symbols of a movement that had, in the eyes of its critics, bloated into a parody of itself. This was the point of crisis, the moment the progressive rock movement flew too close to the sun. And the consequence was swift and brutal. From the grimy pubs and council estates of London, a new movement arose in direct opposition: punk rock. When Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols scrawled "I hate Pink Floyd" on a t-shirt, it was more than a fashion statement. It was a declaration of war. Punk was a violent, necessary purge. It was a return to three chords, raw energy, and relatable anger. It declared that you didn't need a synthesizer or a concept album about goblins to make powerful, meaningful music. For a time, it seemed as if punk had won, and that the grand, elaborate cathedral of progressive rock had been definitively torn down. And for those of us who cherish the audacious spirit of this music, this is a moment of genuine suspense. Was that it? Was this grand experiment a beautiful, flawed, but ultimately failed dead end? Did the punks successfully drive a stake through the heart of the beast? For a while, it certainly looked that way. The word prog became a pejorative, a synonym for everything that was wrong with 1970s rock. But art is never that simple. Ideas are more resilient than trends. And if you're finding this story of artistic clash and creative evolution compelling, let me just quickly remind you to support Psych Prog. A simple click on the subscribe or like button helps us to continue telling these stories, ensuring that this incredible history doesn't get forgotten. It truly makes all the difference. The truth is, progressive rock didn't die. It went underground. It mutated. Its DNA, that potent combination of musical virtuosity and avant-garde conceptualism, was too powerful to simply disappear. It was absorbed and repurposed by the very movements that claimed to despise it. The so-called post-punk bands that followed in the late 70s and early 80s, like Talking Heads, Public Image Limited, led by Johnny Rotten himself, and Wire, were intensely experimental. They rejected Prog's fantasy themes and lengthy solos, but they wholeheartedly embraced its spirit of innovation, its use of unusual rhythms, its incorporation of studio technology as an instrument, and its art school intellectualism. The New Wave movement was built on the synthesizers that bands like ELP and Yes had pioneered. The spirit of Prog was simply stripped of its capes and wizards and given a new, sleeker, more modern uniform. And then, over time, it began to re-emerge, unashamed. In the 1990s and 2000s, a new generation of musicians who had grown up listening to their parents' King Crimson and Genesis records began to form bands. Bands like Tool, the Mars Volta, Porcupine Tree, and even Radiohead, especially on albums like OK Computer, began to reintegrate the core tenets of classic prog: dynamic song structures, complex musicianship, ambitious lyrical themes, and a deep, abiding belief that a rock album could be a cohesive, profound work of art. They had learned the lesson of punk. They tempered the bombast with raw emotion and a more grounded sensibility. But the foundational influence of the avant-garde was undeniable. They proved that the experiment was not a failure. It was merely the first glorious and sometimes clumsy draft of a new musical language that continues to be spoken and reinvented to this day. So we return to our central theme, the profound, indelible link between the visual avant-garde and the sonic explorers of progressive rock. Let us consider one final powerful parallel, that of abstract expressionism. When Jackson Pollock dripped and flung paint onto a canvas on the floor, the resulting painting was not a picture of something. It was the record of an event. The art was the action of its creation. Now think of the legendary improvisational fury of a band like King Crimson. Listen to the jarring, chaotic, yet brilliantly controlled guitar work of Robert Fripp. In those moments of extended, free-form improvisation, the music is not about a story or a melody in the traditional sense. It is, like a Pollock painting, about the energy of the moment. It is the sound of musicians in intense dialogue, pushing each other to the limits of their abilities. It is process as product. The art is the act of playing. This is perhaps the deepest connection of all, the belief that the creative gesture, itself in all its raw, unfiltered glory, is a worthy subject for a work of art. In the end, the invitation that progressive rock extends to us, the listener, is the very same one offered by all great modern art. It asks for our curiosity. It asks for our patience. It asks us to leave our preconceptions at the door. It dares us not to be intimidated by a 15-minute track, but to see it instead as a sprawling sonic mural, full of hidden details and shifting perspectives that reward repeated viewing, or in this case, repeated listening. Don't worry about the time signatures. Don't get bogged down trying to decipher every single cryptic lyric. Instead, allow yourself to do what the musicians themselves did. Let your imagination be your guide. Hear the crashing cymbals and roaring organ of ELP not as noise, but as the sound of a futurist sculpture celebrating the power of technology. Hear the gentle pastoral flute passages of Genesis as a tranquil watercolor landscape. Hear the interlocking, mathematical guitar lines of King Crimson as a piece of kinetic architecture, constantly in motion. The great legacy of progressive rock is that it kicked open the doors of perception for what was possible within a popular music format. It was messy, it was ambitious, it was often flawed, and it was absolutely glorious. It proved that a rock band could be a collective of conceptual artists, and that a turntable could be a portal to an art gallery of the infinite. The gallery is open. The exhibition is permanent. All you have to do is listen. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. If your curiosity is piqued and you're ready for your next exploration, please make sure you are subscribed to Prog. Browse our library of other videos where we untangle more of these fascinating histories and become part of a community that celebrates music that dares to be more. We'll see you next time.